And so I was like, why are we even, because he wanted to go to Olive Garden the other week too. We went to Olive Garden. It's like, why does he want to do this? He said because it is so clear, because it is a straightforward food, they actually make it more consistently. If you go to a non-chain restaurant, they will mess up your order more often. And I guess I'm okay with that, but that's why he likes to go to chain restaurants.
It's very unusual for an artist stoner to make a really, like, a good advocacy for corporate chain restaurants.
I mean, his argument was they do it all the time. His experience is that it's more consistently good at a chain restaurant, which probably makes sense because they're not cooking; they're just pressing buttons and doing what they need to do.
If you get a McDonald's burger in the Czech Republic, it's going to be remarkably consistent,
which is super impressive. I agree, that's impressive, but going out to eat is about the experience. And now I'm just ranting. He's not here, but like going out to eat is the experience of seeing what they're giving you in that moment and what they're serving you. And sometimes, yes, it is bad, but that's the point of going to places.
And then to argue against myself, I am very not creative in what I order. Like if I find something that I like, I will order it 1,000 times more. And so I do enjoy, like, for instance, that the counter exists in multiple locations in the city because they had the Mediterranean bowl and I can just put beef on it instead of turkey. And that's all. That's like my perfect meal, and that's all I ever want. And so
I did tell them last night that if I had my way, and most of my friends are not into this, so I don't do it, but if I had my way, I would eat at a different place every time I go out. I would go to a different place and see what different restaurants like. So many people that I hang out with are like, we got to go to the place that I like. We got to, like, they're afraid almost to go outside of it, but if I had my way, every meal, even every dish, and I know you got your comfort food, it sounds like, but I would even try a different thing every time because it's like, why not? Like, why not try as much stuff?
But what happens when you find something amazing and then you let it go for the chasing the next experience?
I do have my favorites, and I do have comfort food. Some days I'm like, I need this right now. To be honest with you, I've been craving Subway lately. I have not had Subway in a long time, and I used to have that all the time.
Versus Quiznos, you have a preference? Does Quiznos even exist anymore?
Yeah, I've had Quiznos. I like Togos. It's pretty good. And then like if I'm really going to a sandwich place though, like I'd want to go to like Ike's or like something that's a little bit more local. Like
how about is Fat Sal's a little bit too much?
Personally, Fat Sal's is too much, and it's too bland. If it was spicier, I would like it more.
Well, it has to be bland because you're combining mozzarella sticks with a ham sandwich.
Right. It's gross. If they put like hot sauce on it that was made it spicier, I would be more into it. But yes, it's a sandwich of starch is what it is, and that does not even vibe with me.
Yeah, part of the reason that I am so boring in my choices because I have somewhat of a limited diet. So if somebody can do what I like correctly and get me everything, then that is a valuable thing to me. But like Fat Sal's is an example of tasty food that I can eat almost nothing on the whole menu.
Like I said, there are comfort foods, and I have no problem with someone who's like, oh, this is what I like. This I know this works. I know this is delicious, and I do that sometimes. But I also like. I will, whenever I'm traveling, I need to go to a different place every day. Like, why would I visit the same place when I'm traveling? That seems insane to me. And then also, I run into this thing which people have called me out for, which is I can't eat what someone else at the table is eating.
Meaning you can't order the same thing.
Yeah.
Not that like they can't offer you something to taste or something.
I mean, I can, but if you order something that I want, I probably will order something else. Sometimes I've been called out on it, and I just go, okay, fine, I'll order the same thing. But I try not to do that.
Because you want to be. This is like even further down the rabbit hole of being completely original in your eating different foods and even in a given restaurant.
I wouldn't say it's to the OCD level, but it is something where I'm like, no, I got to try something different. We got to do something different here, but.
That's funny.
My friend makes fun of me because he's like, I gotta recommend this thing for you, and then he's like, I'm gonna order it. I'm like, well, then I'm not ordering.
Yeah, it's an easy troll of just going out and then ordering what we think your favorite thing is.
The things just get knocked off the menu. Like, damn it,
that's what I wanted.
I guess I'll have some cold soup.
They only have one of everything, you know that.
I don't know. That would be so weird to me to go out with like 5 people and everyone has the exact same thing. I don't know why that's so weird.
Just feels like you're in a cult or something like that.
I'm already admitting.
I'll have the chicken lo mein. Yes, I'll have the chicken lo mein. Oh, chicken lo mein sounds good. We will all have the chicken. No, we do not wish to share. One for each of us, please. No family style.
I guess I'll have the orange chicken. Excuse me? What did you just say? We all ordered the chicken main here.
Please sit over there, sir.
I'm worried about the camera, but I guess it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to get you
look the way
here.
I look. Well, I can't look at myself while I'm looking.
Yeah, it's better that you can't see that.
That's probably good.
You don't need to see that. I usually can't see that. George used to have like a giant shield, like a Dungeon Master shield that he would set up behind and do all of his editing in secret back there.
Probably smart. I guess you'll let me know if I look terrible. I just look the way I look. I feel like the older I get, the more...
I don't know who's being critical of how you look just because you're...
No, when I was younger... I did go to school for broadcasting, so I did get trained in like what you're supposed to,
Oh.
You're not supposed to be too distracting. You're supposed to be just kind of like as expected, or like portray the thing you're expected. Mm-hmm. But I feel like the older I get, and especially the way I start to talk, like when I was younger too, I used to talk about movies and pop culture and stuff. But now it's like, I think I'm very professorial. Like I'm kind of like an old academic.
You talk about like Old Spice and Ben Gay.
I always get into deep stuff.
Pipes. And
I always get into like, this is the meaning of life. And I feel like it's less. I went from being hipster to now just like, oh, this old guy knows some stuff, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's thoughtful now.
Hopefully. Yeah. I like it, but maybe not as entertaining.
Well, speaking of entertainment, we have put this podcast together for your entertainment. Welcome to AI Affected, the show about algorithms, machine learning, and AI and its effect on everyday people. Although I think I'm going to start saying its effect on artists, because every single person that's been here thus far has been an artist, and our guest this week is no exception. He's a wonderful artist and improviser. He's also a video game industry veteran, a former columnist for the Joystiq Network and for Engadget, and a producer behind the scenes of many of the top titles and favorite titles that you've ever played. Please welcome Mike Schramm. Mike, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. That's a glorious introduction. I wouldn't say producer on games. I've contributed to games, but...
Okay.
I consult a lot of times. So
but you're not in the factory putting the box on top of the CD, so you're not a producer specific.
No, I'm more provide guidance, provide insights in terms of making games better. So that's what my Twitter bio said once upon a time.
Yes, you are, for the last several years, you were some kind of shadowy consultant behind the scenes that... And I wanted to ask you about this, obviously, but do you provide insight into the minds of gamers and like what they want out of a title that's kind of in production already?
I used to be a blogger, as you said. I worked for Joystiq, which was one of the biggest game blogs. Now no longer exists, and unfortunately BuzzFeed News just closed as well. Another blog called Waypoint just closed as well, so gaming media is not so much a thing anymore. I guess I predicted that. And looked for another company. And so, I work now for a company called Interpret. We do games research is what it's called. And it's essentially market research for games, including focus groups, including interviews and surveys and different things like that to help game companies make better decisions. Also including what we call qualitative research, which is interviews and desktop research and just figuring things out about games to try to make better decisions about gaming.
So you just reminded me of the Netflix documentary about which you're well familiar with because I've read your columns about classic games like Pac-Man and stuff. So in other words, the transition from Pac-Man to Miss Pac-Man, this wasn't done officially. This was done by some hackers, but they decided it was kind of monotonous. Let's change up the levels. Let's make it more challenging. And Miss Pac-Man was infinitely more replayable than Pac-Man was, kind of thing.
Well, I don't know about infinitely. Pac-Man's pretty replayable, but yeah, Miss Pac-Man specifically was not official, as you said, I think. But yeah, I mean, I love games. I mean, I'm a giant fan of gaming. I've been a gaming fan my entire life, and I mean, part of this research that I do for these, part of it is for clients, just to help people make better games and help people produce better games. But part of it is gaming is so fascinating to me because it's a universal language. anybody of any language, of any culture, can sit down and play some game. Some games are dependent on language, but some games are not dependent on language, to the point where anyone of any culture can sit down and play it, and it works. They get it. They understand what's happening. They understand what to do. And certainly there's a lot of people who aren't familiar with game controllers, or they can't control things. They can't control the camera. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is kind of conventional in games that the general public doesn't necessarily get into. Only like people who've played games for a while really understand it, or really get into using it for a long time. But there are some games that you can just put in front of anyone from anywhere, and that fascinates me, and that's really what we're doing when we're doing this research, is like, how do people connect with games? What do they react to? And that's both what types of technology can you use to provide stimuli, but also how our brains work, how our brains present. Like, one common game thing is, if you want people to leave a level or to go forward in a level, you put light on where you want them to go, because humans, similar to moths, just tend to go towards the lighted areas. We tend to stay away.
So is that just like kind of looking for the escape from a cave, like prehistoric, brain structures of like?
Well, as simple as a designer designs a level and you run two people through it to test it, and they just go, I don't know where to go. I don't know where I'm supposed to head out. If you put more light in the area where they're supposed to go, turns out they get out of the level easier, and it's smoother, and it's a better experience for everybody. So, and that's a very simple thing. That's not, we don't discover that. That's an old school game design thing. But things like that, where you look at how people react to stimuli, and that's what games are, is audio, video stimuli, or text, or there's been some touch and things like that. But yeah, how do people react to that? And then how do you better design the game so that the designer's intention comes across to whoever sits down to play it.
So in a sense, you're kind of dabbling pretty heavily in human psychology when you're doing your work.
Yes, I am. And a lot of things in game design, in design in general. Don Norman is a terrific writer, written a bunch of great books about how objects work and how we perceive objects and how we interact with objects. And that, I think, relates directly to the type of things I do in games and things like that. And then also movies, visual media, and how it puts together how people perceive time and presentations, and how they perceive, dialogue and things like that. That all fits into the
Can you give me an example of objects, the way that people perceive them, and sort of a way in a video game that, the designer might think it should be designed this way, but then people can't quite grasp it because it doesn't translate into their...
Yeah, I'm blanking. I mean, Don Norman in his books talks about things as simple as, designing door handles to work the way people expect them to, like designing door handles to turn the way that people expect it to work. And even stoves, you talk about stoves, like you can buy a stove. Even today, I think you can still buy stoves where it does not make sense how things work. And as simple as, there's 4 burners on a stove. If you put the 4 knobs on the stove to control each burner in the same configuration that you have the burners laid out, people get it. If you put them in a line, or you put them in some other configuration, they're like, what burner turns what? And they just can't understand it. So using people's perceptions and using people's expectations, which is what we study in market research, which is essentially like the core piece of what I do, but it's in games, of course. But how do you understand people's perceptions to help things better work? Like and that's what design is. Like, how do you help things move forward correctly, or help people interact correctly with objects.
And I can imagine that, like, if a game studio is developing some, sci-fi title or something like that, like, they're probably more interested in, like, the character arc and the plot, rather than, does this space stove, is it aligned properly, so that when you interact with it in minute 97 of the game, do people kind of know how it works? So I guess you get into the
But the
weeds.
beautiful thing is it all fits together. The beautiful thing is you can express character through how they interact with weapons, how they interact with things, and you can express story through the visuals that you use, or the colors that you use, or the layout of a level, or things like that. So that's the fun part, is combining all these different experiences that humans have had, and how they interact with things, and then using them. I mean, doors is famously something that is extremely hard to program in a game. A door has many different states. You can open it, you can leave it half open, you can leave it half closed, and it doesn't always close by itself. Like in real life, you have to shut the door, like people have to push the door, or unless there's a mechanic on it or something like that. So doors are notoriously hard to program in games. And so, what type of level are you designing, and how are you going to design the doors to correct? Or, like, if there's a door in a game that doesn't open, we see that all the time. We test a game and people go up to a door thinking that it can open, and they're like, why doesn't this door open? And that's a very frustrating experience, to come across a door in a game that doesn't open. So Design the door so that it looks like it's been shut for 30 years. Design the door so that it's in the darkness.
Oh, as if it was like a broken door on a space vessel that's been drifting in space. And
so that it reads as not openable. And then no one even goes to test it. They don't go, this door isn't open. They just go, oh, I can't go that way. That door's not open. So you're designing the environment. You're designing the stimuli to better interact with how people, how people perceive it, and then make the interaction better. Because you want people to have fun, and you want people to not necessarily even have fun. You want people to connect up with whatever the game designer's intention is. If I want you to feel nervous in this moment, how do I make you feel nervous? If I want you to feel excited, or I want you to feel powerful, or I want you to feel not powerful, how does a game do that? That's kind of what we study at a larger level. I mean, it's also things like, people come to us and say, is there space in the market for a game like this? Do people care about this genre? There is like more traditional market research and forecasting type stuff.
So how do you make people feel nervous?
We feel nervous when we're powerless. So taking away a lot of power, like, if the controller doesn't work exactly right, or you can't move forward, or you lose some of your weapons or things you've been able to do previously in the game, that usually makes people nervous. Shaking the screen around, making it hard to see what's on the screen, making it hard to recognize things, makes you feel nervous. I mean, it's just like film. How does The Exorcist scare the hell out of people? It's celluloid on film, but
but it's a little girl vomiting against the wall.
Incorporates these symbols that really freak us out and really freak us out. And again, like I said, on a mass level, which is what's fascinating to me. Like, it's not necessarily that. And some games, like I said, they are language dependent. Some games do depend on even games like Diablo 4. You kind of need to have some idea of what Diablo. I mean, certainly Blizzard has done a great job of designing the game to get people into it and get people figuring it out. But you kind of need to understand. Oh, you're leveling up and you're fighting these creatures. And like there's deeper knowledge that if you're very experienced in games, you have. But there's a game called Journey. Same company made a game called Flower. Those are games that I think are brilliant and that don't use text at all. You can just sit down and play them, and they come across through some magical communication. I mean, just that's what it is, communication. Like you're experiencing that in the moment.
Just like a visual medium instead.
Yeah, visual and audio, and also the tactileness of the controller. Like the controller also is a piece of that too. So anyway, obviously, I guess maybe not obviously, but yeah, it's something I really love and something I'm super passionate about. And like I said, the whole intention is to use the data that we gather, use the research that we gather to try to make games the best they can possibly be. That's what I enjoy about it.
So can I ask, in terms of like the Diablo franchise, so would you be called in while they're developing some sequel to a very popular franchise, and then is it part of your job to say, well, how do we capture the essence of Diablo so that we know that if it's a new game with new graphics and new mechanics, it still feels like the Diablo that people have been playing for years?
I mean, that's a very high level question. Specifically, that question, hopefully they're thinking about long before they even start making the game. Like, what types of games should we get into here? What should we do? But yeah, I mean, I can't unfortunately talk about my specific clients because a lot of this stuff I do is under non-disclosure agreement because it is, we are helping large game developers like Activision and others. So, we work for a lot of different game companies, but yes, what we do is what we call custom research, and custom research usually means their questions drive whatever we're trying to figure out. And so it really depends on the project, depends on the situation. Many times we think we can make a game in this space. Is there enough room in this space for us to make this game? And we sort of look at the market. Then other times we have a game. Is it any good? Like, it's very early. I've worked off of game design documents. I've worked off of games in progress and tried to figure out, do those line up with what people want? Do those meet expectations? Are they below expectations? A lot of times too, internally at the game company, somebody might think, oh, this game's great. Somebody else might think this game's pretty terrible. And they just need someone to come in and say, tell us if this is good or not, or why it's good or not, or what connects with people or not. So, and then usually we do interviews, focus groups, surveys, and sometimes just expert opinions. Like, we just sit down and kind of look at the situation and say, okay, according to what we've seen in the past, this is what it comes out to be. So
cool. Well, I won't ask you to violate any NDAs.
Well, and I will say, I will call out goodgamergroup.com. Goodgamergroup.com is our internal panel for research participants. So if anyone watching this is fascinated by this and wants to participate in research, hit up goodgamergroup.com. But yeah, the other thing is, a lot of the work we do, we do, I think, make games better. We do a good job of it, and obviously the development team deserves much more credit than I do. Like I'm not programming games. I'm not making them myself. Like the people who are actually making the games deserve much more credit than I do. But hopefully, and I do think this is true, we have provided research that has, and I'm told this is true, we've provided research that has made them go, oh, we didn't think about this in this way, or we didn't see this in this way, and then that leads to a very successful game, or a much more successful game.
This might be an old hat, but can I ask you to put on your game analysis / journalist hat for a moment? You might have to dust it off.
Well, I'm doing game. It's my job every day. Go ahead.
Okay. I read an article that you wrote about the launch of Diablo 3.
Yeah.
Which I remember being one of my favorite games. Maybe not the reason that you would think it is. It was because of the short-lived in-game auction house.
You like the in-game auction
house. The real
house.
money in-game auction house. I am fascinated by virtual real money economies and why they succeed and why they fail. I once sold a randomly generated Diablo 3 weapon for like $250. And
must have been early, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was very early
Yeah.
because, like, as you well know, you release an expansion, you make all of the original items kind of obsolete to some level. They're value tanks, but the economy, especially the real money economy, like gives you a real sense of like what is the demand for these things, and ties the video game to the real world and how people will actually choose to spend their money. So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that or other real money virtual economies.
Well, I will tell you a story that probably should be behind an NDA, but I did not sign an NDA at the time. So
got one.
I was a journalist at the time when Diablo 3 came out. Diablo 3, just for context, in case anyone's listening that does not play Diablo 3 or isn't interested, it is a game where you hack and slash through a bunch of dungeons, you earn new gear, that gear allows you to be more powerful, then you can hack and slash through more dungeons, you earn more gear, etc., and then suddenly you become the best barbarian or sorcerer, whatever you want to be in the world. When Diablo 3 came out, Blizzard, the developers, said, ooh, people from our previous game, Diablo 2, are buying and selling some of these items illegally, like, overseas and different things like that. And they said, why would we let that happen illegally? Why don't we make an official store where we can allow people to buy and sell the items that they earn in this game with real money? So then if someone doesn't want to have to play for 80 hours to get a cool sword, they can just jump onto the real money store. And in fact, I was a journalist at the time. They invited me to their campus, and I was in the room when they showed the first group of journalists, this is what we're doing. They gave us a whole presentation and said, people are already doing this. They're doing it illegally. They're doing it not illegally, but like unofficially. They're doing it outside of our jurisdiction. We want to do it in real time. We want to do it for ourselves, and we want to do it in the game for ourselves. And I wrote an article about it, and maybe that's one of the articles you read. And I even went out, and again, this maybe should be under NDA. I went out to lunch with one of the developers afterwards, and he sat me down over lunch and said, "What do you think? Tell me what you think," because he wanted to get feedback on this thing which eventually they got plenty of feedback. And long story short, Blizzard decided that it was a mistake and eventually pulled it. It sounds like you liked it, but eventually they decided, ooh, we should not have done this, and they eventually pulled the whole thing out, and the community was much happier because it did cause a lot of problems I'll talk about in a second here. But I told them two things that they did not see. I'm very proud they did not see, and I saw that very first day. The first one is, I expected prices to go up high very quickly. I was like, there are some valuable swords in this game, and some people will pay, not everybody, but some people will pay a lot of money. They told me, no, we've done a lot of calculations. We do not think swords will get above $5 or $10.
Wow.
I said it seems very incorrect to me. I didn't have any data at the time, but I said that seems very incorrect. Some people will happily pay a lot of money, and turns out I was right, as you said. Some people happily jumped in and did that. And then the other thing, which I didn't have fully formed at the time, but which turned out to be eventually true, I said, when you bring in real world money to something like that, it really throws the value around. It really changes the value of the items that you find. Like if you don't have real world money included and someone wants to grind 80 hours to get a sword, they'll kind of do it because that's the only way you can get it. That's the achievement of doing it. When you can pay $3 for the same sword you can grind 80 hours for, they won't do it. They'll either pay money or they'll go, this sword's only worth $3. Why in the world would I grind $80 for it? Like it changes the value. And that's what I told them. I was like, including real money will really affect the value of these items. And what they found was, and this isn't something I necessarily saw, but what they found was not only did it affect the value, but it affected the value on an individual level. One person said, yes, it is worth 80 hours for me to grind this sword. Another person said, yeah, I'll grind 80 hours for the sword and sell it for $300. Another person said, I don't know what this sword is. I just found it after playing for 80 hours. I'm going to sell it for $3. So that's the thing, is it threw the value off so much. And that's why they eventually decided not to do it anymore, is because they wanted people to want to grind 80 hours to do that, or they wanted people to try to earn a little bit of money on the side to do that. That was their original intention, but obviously it threw all the values off. And game developers are still trying to figure that out, of how does it work, because when you're playing a game, you will do more work because you're playing, you're having a good time. But the second that you start being like, you could earn some money with this, people start thinking about it like work, like a job. And that changes the thing. So
that's interesting. It's almost the inverse relationship of the poker chip phenomenon, which has been described as like the top gamblers, you know, they might have $50,000 worth of chips in front of them, but for them to play properly, they cannot think of it as money. It's just chips, and they have to make, you know, bet their positions and bluff and not think about the real world value of what they're doing, because it would negatively affect their being good at poker.
Right.
So this is kind of the opposite, which is that you have this fantasy world where you're just spending 100 hours because it's fun, and then the minute that it's translated into, well, what's my hourly rate playing Diablo 3, you're like, oh, I live in a third world country.
Right. But that's not why you started in the first place, because it's a fun game. You're just playing around with it. So yes, I don't think we've even fully solved, quote unquote, all of the different mechanics going around that, and you know, economics in general. Like we haven't solved all that stuff. But yeah, it's still an open issue, I would say, in games, like how, if at all, you incorporate real world value into in-game items. There are some successful marketplaces, but again, usually what they do is put a firewall somewhere. Somewhere it has to be like, the value of this item is this, and that's it, whether you like it or not. So,
I mean, for my part, like I said, I love this mechanism whenever it exists, and I look for it. And the closest thing that I'm using right now is not a real money auction house, but it is the trading post in the Amazon Games New World MMORPG.
Sure.
And, you know, I hang out with people who play the game, and we talk about what we're doing in Discord, and there are people who literally spend 60 to 70% of their game playing time just gaming the market, manipulating the price of commodities on the market. So they'll buy up a whole bunch and wait for an event where you need like a certain type of leaf to make a potion, and then they'll dump a bunch on the market and just literally spend their time arbitraging like components in the game. And it's fascinating, to me anyway.
No, and that's the thing, is like, again, when you introduce money, everyone knows the value of money, and that's what I think throws it off, is that the value of money is apparent to people. And so we talked about the 80-hour sword. Some people will say $3 for an 8-hour sword. I would never do that. Some people say, 80 hours for $3. If I got 4 of my friends to play for 80 hours, I could pay them $2 and get into cycles like that. And there certainly are farms of people, have been farms of people working to earn money in games like New World or in games like World of Warcraft and selling all that stuff. Obviously, the developers have tried to prevent some of it, but it's still out there for sure. But yes, whenever you bring real world money into a factor like that, it changes how people perceive, and again, on an individual level, how people perceive things. And that's what Blizzard found with that marketplace, and that's why it no longer exists in the game, even though I did feel very privileged. And I got a lot of heat for this at the time. I gave Diablo 3 5 out of 5 stars. I think it's a terrific game, and I think even with the in-world auction house, it was a really inventive, interesting thing to do. But even on that day, even months and years before the game came out, on that day that they showed us that plan, I was like, you're not foreseeing all the different things that people will do with this.
One other thing that may have contributed to the downfall of these auction houses is you would see, not to stereotype, but what is usually known as like the Chinese gold farmer syndrome, where you have a bunch of people who are literally working in like a sweatshop equivalent of a video game factory, who know that, you know, in the example of New World, like there is no official real money auction house, but they can sell gold on the black market.
Sure.
And so it has an exchange rate. So it's like, you know, whatever it is, $6 for 10,000 gold or something like that. And they know that if they become efficient enough at mining gold in the game, they can make a wage that might be better than what they could get doing, you know, some manual labor job wherever they live, in Shenzhen or wherever. And so that becomes its own economy. And then now the company is like, well, we have this huge user base that's using it for this, so if we shut it off, we're going to lose all these people.
Sure.
And they have to figure out whether it's it's worthwhile or ethical or what.
Sure. Yeah. It's a sticky issue. I do think that developers have now started. I mean, back when World of Warcraft was at its heyday, I think it was just kind of chaos. There was farms everywhere, and people were trying to sell money and make money all the time. I do think that developers have now understood more about what actually drives value and what makes these items valuable or not, and so they have better ways of tracking. And I think in World of Warcraft you can actually buy gold with real world money, but they actually keep it almost like federal interest rates. Like they watch out for how much the gold is coming through and how much gold is in the economy, and they have hired economists to actually track the totals to make sure that they keep the value where they want it to be.
It's crazy that games like World of Warcraft and New World have like a Jay Powell whose job is to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve of the virtual economy and decide how much inflation should exist and all that stuff.
I mean, and I'm a little biased because I love games. I'm really into games. But when you're talking about a massively multiplayer online game, which is what MMORPG is, you are talking about thousands of people playing in the same space. And then it's a human organization problem. It's not necessarily even a coding problem or a game design problem. It's how do we organize people to create the environment that we want? How do we organize people to not be jerks to each other? How do we organize people to, want to go out there and fight monsters, to want to get together in groups and do this together? Like, how do we drive them to do that? And again, it boils down to this core thing of like, how do you use this stimuli to encourage people to interact or to interact with the game in a specific way? So
one scandal related to real world economies, which was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago or something, that had to do with CSGO, Counter-Strike Global Offensive.
Sure.
Apparently the weapon skins that you could acquire from chests in the game, some of them were exceedingly rare. And like you said, the value went up to thousands of dollars for the right super rare weapon skins.
Sure.
And I think Steam, there was a class action lawsuit against Steam because people felt like you were enabling. First of all, there was a gambling mechanism. So you had to like pay $2 and then you would roll for some type of treasure chest, and the high end treasure chests were like more likely to yield the high value things. And so for users who could be 12 or 13 years old, they were being encouraged to play this virtual slot machine. And then there was this whole other black market economy where people are buying and selling these things for thousands of dollars, and sometimes scamming other players and pretending to sell them something and taking their money in advance. And like, it was, like you said, a big mess.
Yeah. I mean, it's all people doing people stuff. Like it's all pretty standard. I do think that, I mean, intermittent rewards is something that we know is effective in gaming, and it works the same way in gambling.
Can you define intermittent rewards?
So intermittent rewards, and again, specific games, there's definitely bad actors all over the place. So I don't know if specific markets are good or not, or if you like markets or not. But intermittent rewards is this idea that, and now we're getting into psychology, the idea that, if you press a lever and get a reward all the time, you will get bored very quickly. And that's what they do when they test rats. They test behavior. B.F. Skinner back
even
in
like
the
the cocaine lever, they get bored of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at that point you get biologic. I'm not a biologist. I don't know how cocaine, how high level addiction works necessarily.
Fine, I'll cross that question off the list. Fine.
But if you hit a lever and you get a treat every time, you get very bored. Rats get bored. Humans get bored. We go up, great, up, great, up. I know how this works. And I've watched people play games a lot, and I watch them go up. I see how this works. I'm done. Like, they don't need to learn anything else about it. But intermittent rewards is you press the lever and sometimes you get a treat and sometimes you don't. And that is much more fascinating to both humans and other animals. We are fascinated by this idea of, wait, I'm trying to figure out this pattern. And humans can figure out patterns pretty quickly, but if there is no pattern, if it's random, that's even fascinating to us. We go, oh, sometimes I press this lever and I do get this thing. Sometimes I press and I don't get this thing. And we talked about Diablo. That's what Diablo is. Sometimes you kill a creature and you don't get much. Every once in a while you kill a creature and a really nice, colorful sword drops. And a big thing drops and you go, the next time I kill, I wonder if a sword's going to pop out or not. And that's what it is. And the
You're talking about the RNG.
The RNG, the random number generation, basically, that comes out of it. And that is fascinating. Gambling works the exact same way. Sometimes you pull the slot machine lever and you get a reward. Sometimes you pull the slot machine lever and you don't. And it costs you every time. And that's how casinos make their money. That's how that stuff works. It's definitely related. I do not think that, I think that there's fun to be had in random intermittent rewards and things like that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing or like that it's intrinsically addictive or intrinsically problematic. I do think that you can design more or less addictive intermittent rewards patterns. You can design rewards that do keep people more addicted, and some of that stuff can get dangerous. And as you said, like the EU is really getting into regulation. The EU is a leader in terms of regulation and privacy lately, and they are really getting into and especially when you talk about kids playing these games, that's a little different because then it's like, all right, well they don't really have the knowledge even or the biology to make good decisions about what's fair or what's not or how that stuff goes. So that I do think there's things to worry about there for sure. But yes, they are definitely related. I don't think that games necessarily equals gambling, but certainly the appeal of games is based in many parts on this idea of like you sometimes get rewards, you sometimes don't, and that's really strong.
Along those lines, and without violating any NDAs, hopefully, can I ask, does this kind of ethical consideration come up internally, which is, you have a goal. Let's say, for instance, in one given project, your goal will be, well, how can we increase the amount of engagement? And this is something that we see across the spectrum in social media. Like, well, we know that if we set up this kind of intermittent reward system, then people will use it more, and engagement is good because that's when we make money from advertisers. But there becomes a point where we're dealing with addictive behavior.
Yeah.
And is there ever a balancing act internally for these kind of optimization teams to be like, we can make it more effective, but should we make it more effective?
I mean, at my level, I'm really advising the people that are making those types of decisions. So at my level, I certainly wouldn't want to design anything that hurt anybody, but I'm not designing the games myself. I'm more providing feedback along those lines. So, and would I intentionally make something that's addictive? No, no one would. Like, you wouldn't want to hurt people necessarily. I mean, it really is each individual's person. I don't think anyone wants to hurt anyone, but everyone does want games to be engaging and does want games to connect. There's also the factor of, you can make a very, very engaging game that is healthy for most people, and for some people it is not. And so that's not anything
Which is probably the way that the bell curve typically shakes out on these things.
And
right?
that's not anything I think you can hold developers responsible for necessarily. I mean, there's certainly people who interact in all kinds of ways. So yeah, I do think that the issue is there, and I do think that, I think that especially in the last few years, especially after Cambridge Analytica and some of the stuff that's come out of Facebook and Twitter, people are a little bit more keeping an eye on what engagement means and how much engagement is too much engagement, how that stuff works. But my level, again, I'm more just providing the advice along that stuff. And in my experience, again, if you make a game that hurts someone, it won't sell. Like, it'll hurt people.
Right.
Like, it doesn't work as well. So.
So
watch out for, of course, though.
Without the insidious overtones of the previous question. So something that we've also observed is that obviously studying behavior, as you well know, is probably more important now than it was 10 years ago. Like 10 years ago, you made a game and you probably maybe do focus groups and stuff like that. But would you argue that it's more sophisticated in the way that we try to get the human feedback and try to program things that people want and that they're more likely to use, more so than the older days of gaming?
Well, I will say, because of the costs of my work, I generally work with high-level development teams, and high-level development teams are often just a big problem of organizing thousands of people. So it's not even necessarily...
You're talking about the players as opposed to the employees?
No, even just the employees.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes you have thousands of people making these games, and sometimes it's just, let's get on the same page about what this game does and what this game can do. Now, and that also means that when I work with developers, they're usually big enough that they can pay for my work, and so I'm only working with a relatively high level of team organization where it's like... it's not 4 or 5 people working on a game. It's hundreds or thousands of people working on a game. Mm-hmm. But certainly there's a ton of game development all over the place, and there's many, many more single and double developers and teams of 5 people and teams of 6 people, or friends who are just sitting around making games. There's thousands of games coming out on Steam every single year. So I forgot what the original question was, but
it was
my point is that there's a lot of different types of game making out there, and so there's all kinds of types of games that are being made. Go ahead.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, something that we talk about a lot on this show is the sort of like the filter bubble phenomenon, for example, where there's an algorithm, let's say a social media algorithm,
sure,
and it will say, well, if you like that, you like this. And then what ends up happening down the road, down the snowball of that kind of algorithm is people are eventually only shown one type of thing because the algorithm goes, well, I just want you to engage. So if you like that, you like this. And if you like that, you like this. And it kind of unintentionally leads them down a path where person A is only seeing one kind of news and person B is seeing a totally different universe of news.
Sure.
And they've maybe not even insidiously been led there. It's just the algorithm going, I don't want to show you anything you don't like because I don't want you to leave. So I'm wondering, does that phenomenon exist in gaming to any, like more so than it used to, do you think?
No, I mean, there's so many games, and also there's no requirement to play any specific game. So there are some people who try every single game that comes out. They play everything that comes out. They buy new games all the time. There are some people who wait 3 years for a game to come out and then they play 4 or 5 of them. There's some people who just play one game all the time. So I think there's still enough sort of freedom in terms of what games you can play, where people want you to engage, that it's not a major issue. I will say, so Game Pass is a thing that has come up. And Apple Arcade are subscription services. Netflix is also releasing some games on its subscription service and things like that. So we're starting to see games included in subscriptions. And when you move to a subscription model like that, then you do have some questions about, like, what do you track? Like, you can't really track sales because you're not buying a game, you're paying for the subscription. So you can't say, oh, this game sold X number of copies. Especially on Game Pass, if 100,000 people play your game on Game Pass, is that 100,000 sales? Probably not. Many of those people are probably just playing the game for a few minutes and putting it down, or they're just checking it out or things like that. So that is kind of interesting that when we move into the subscription space, then the question is, like, should engagement be the main metric? Should we care? Oh, we want you to play this game, or for story-based games where you play it for 10 hours and it's done. They can't engage people the same amount of time as like a match-based League of Legends type of game where you're playing over and over again. So we are seeing some of that stuff where even just the metrics of what makes a successful game might be changing, because it's less about this old model of, oh, you buy a game, you play through it, you're finished with it, you're done. Now it's like, oh, there's games that have been like going on for many, many years, and they want people to play for many, many years, and they release new content. They try to keep people playing. There's also games that are on these subscription services that they want to track, like, you know, if a lot of people play this game, does that count? Should we pay them for that? How does that work? So that's the interesting part, is maybe like where people are putting their attention is starting to be tracked more closely.
I like that a lot, because I feel like the analogy I thought of is basketball is a very different game than it was 10 years ago because of analytics, because the data nerds have said, well, a layup is a high-value shot, an uncontested corner three is a high-value shot. And so what teams have done over the last 10 years is they go, oh, we're only going to take as many high-value shots as we possibly can. So you have a much more spread-out offense, and all these mid-range guys are being encouraged not to do that. So one would think that, you know, a match-based game like League of Legends that presents a good analytical engagement picture when you're trying to get funding, or, you know, when you're paying subscribers or whatever, does that push the industry in a given direction and say, like, well, this type of game is much more likely to be spun out than something like Katamari Damacy, which is this weird alien game of rolling up a big clump of garbage, which my kids love ever since I've introduced it. My whole house is obsessed with it, but maybe not the best for generating engagement.
I mean, my answer is it might. Again, Microsoft has this service called Game Pass, which if you are subscribed to, you probably love it because it does offer a ton of value. It used to be you had to pay $60 for a brand new game. Now it's like even more sometimes. With Game Pass, it's like $60 a year right now, and you get all of the games that are on that service. So they are definitely like playing with the mechanics of what's going on there. I don't know of a game yet necessarily, although maybe there are some out there. I don't know of a game that has said, okay, if our goal is engagement, we're going to try to make this game as engaging as possible. Even if it's short or something, we're going to try to pull you in. Obviously, games like League of Legends and games like World of Warcraft do want you to keep playing, and they have looked at engagement and tried to keep that going. Here's a great example. This is actually an older example, but one thing they found when World of Warcraft first came out, before World of Warcraft came out, the idea is you log in to the game, you play the game, and you earn experience points. And what they wanted people to do was not stay logged in 24/7. They didn't want people to play the game 24/7. So what they initially did was, well, okay, you're earning experience points if you play for more than 16 hours, which maybe is way too long to be playing a game. We're going to turn down your experience point earning. So it's going to become less, you're going to earn fewer experience points as you play. And what they found was that did kick people out of the game, but it was a frustrating experience. People were like, I don't earn as many experience points. I got to leave the game. And so what they did is they flipped it on its head and they created something called rested experience. And rested experience is you log out of the game, and now while you're logged out of the game, you will accrue extra experience. And then when you come back into the game, you'll earn double the experience that you would have earned if you'd stayed in the game. Same effect. People want to log out of the game because they don't want to stay in there. But instead of being punished for logging out of the game, they then get rewarded because when they log back into the game, they earn twice as much experience.
Yeah, I remember that mechanism in World of Warcraft.
And it's very successful. People love it because they're like, this is so great. I had to leave the game, or I couldn't play the game for a couple of days. I came back. I got all this rested experience. I get to earn double the experience. So it created, and what they noticed, and they've done this, and whenever you have a mobile app and it's like, hey, welcome back to the game, they welcome you back. It's because, I have a good memory of returning to this game. I'm more likely to return to the game. So there definitely are techniques and mechanics that are being put in there. But again, at the end of the day, if a game really is hurtful, then no one will play it because then it'll just hurt people. So I do think there's a line between what we want to do. Like I said, I haven't seen anybody yet, and maybe it has existed, but I haven't seen anybody yet who's like, we're on a subscription service. Our goal is to get people to play the game as much and as long as possible. We are going to design the game to do that. But there are things like, let's give people a recap of the game story when they come back to the game. That is designed to bring you back into the game. It's designed to be a good experience when you come back into the game. Or let's give people a recap of what the controls are like. If they haven't played the game for 2 months, let's tell them about the controls and remind them about that. Like, that's an experience where it's like, hey, you're kind of encouraging people to come back in, encouraging engagement. So we'll see. I mean, if we move to a model where engagement is the only metric, we probably will see games designed for engagement, which might be cool, might be dangerous. Who knows? Just like everything else in the world. So
I want to ask you more about WoW. You used to participate and write for WoW Insider.
WoW Insider was a great site, that unfortunately is also gone now. It moved to WoW.com for a little while. But yeah, I was editor-in-chief, co-editor-in-chief of WoW Insider for a little while, and then I wrote about it for a little while too.
How long did you personally play WoW?
Well, I don't play it anymore, I should say. I've generally stopped playing. I will go back occasionally and just see what's new or see what's in it. I probably played it for 2003 or 4 when it came out, 2012, 2010, so 5-6 years.
Did you also play did you like me, I grew up with RPGs, and then when MMORPGs came out, I was like, with other people that you can play this type of adventure, advancement game.
I played a game called Dark Age of Camelot, which was pretty popular before
you
World
did.
of Warcraft. Yep.
I'm very familiar with Dark Age of Camelot.
And I've played a couple of other MMOs before that. Most of the MMOs I played after that, because like I said, I joined, so I started playing World of Warcraft as just someone who liked games like World of Warcraft and Blizzard's games in general.
I want to ask you about Dark Age of Camelot.
Okay, well, and then I got hired to write about World of Warcraft, and at that point, then for my job, I was doing all this stuff, so then I got more into it. But
How long did you play Dayak, as it is known?
Probably a year and a half. Probably a year and a half before I played World of Warcraft, and that was my number one experience. So World of Warcraft also was a very polished MMO, and before World of Warcraft, the MMOs were not quite as polished. And
yes.
So, yes, go ahead.
Yes, those of us who were longtime veterans of Dark Age of Camelot would complain about WoW as it was like cookie cutter and too easy, and the penalties for death were not stringent enough, like where you lose experience and you lose equipment and it's very expensive.
Well,
and all that stuff.
I will say this. Both Blizzard and Nintendo, which is one of my favorite game companies, and obviously they're very successful, both of them kind of have taken, and not so much about Blizzard anymore. I mean, this is now, World of Warcraft came out in 2003, so this is 20 years ago now that we're talking about Blizzard making World of Warcraft, but they both do something that Nintendo calls lateral thinking with withered technology. Have you ever heard of that before?
No.
So Nintendo's technique, their sort of plan is this idea of lateral thinking with withered technology. Nintendo's goal is not to make the latest and greatest best thing you've ever seen. Their goal is not to use the hottest new chip or the hottest new technology. Their goal is to do what they call lateral, so they're jumping from one point to another. Lateral thinking with withered technology. They want to use stuff that's old. They want to use stuff that is reliable and stuff that has been around for a long time and stuff that they can depend on. They can make it cheaply. Like, they want to use stuff that has been out there. PlayStation and Xbox want you to have the latest and greatest graphics. Nintendo is not worried about graphics. They want to make stuff that's been familiar. And the Game Boy is a perfect example of this. The Game Boy is one of the most successful consoles of all time. There's a great apocryphal story. One of the developers of the Game Boy, one of his junior employees came to him when they were making the Game Boy. I think it was either about the Sega Game Gear or some other competitor. And they came to him and they said, "Oh my gosh, we're in trouble. There's a competitor to the Game Boy being made while we're making the Game Boy." And the guy said, well, he was like, don't worry. Tell me one thing. Does it have a color screen? And the junior employee said, "Yes, it does have a colored screen." And the guy said, "We're fine." Because he knew that not only did the non-colored screen in the Game Boy have a much better battery life, the Game Boy was like a 30-hour battery life, which is shocking for the early 1980s. But he also knew that if they depended on just good graphics that could be recognized through any color, it would work and it would connect with other people. And so, and that's the same thing with World of Warcraft. Blizzard looked around and they actually hired a bunch of Dark Age of Camelot players to help them make World of Warcraft, because they said, look at all these MMOs that are really cool but are so messy to play and so hard to understand and so hard to get into. What if we made a game that was accessible, that anybody could play, that anybody could get into? And that's one reason why World of Warcraft was so successful, is because it took this massively multiplayer gameplay and put it in a form which expert players called too simple and kind of lame, but general people who had never played MMOs before said, "I understand this," and that gets back to Don Norman stuff. It's more intuitive, it's more explainable, it's more understandable. So.
Yes, there were a number of, and again, this is more like the old man talking about kind of how good the old days were when I talk about Dark Age, because it was an incredibly wonky game. Mm-hmm. You would get on a horse to go from one town to another, and it would be like a 15-minute horse ride, as opposed to just teleporting you where you needed to go. Yes. Quests didn't make sense. It was like things were hidden. There were no icons above quest markers, so it was very unclear like what you're supposed to do. You'd search for things for hours, but it was our game.
Well, that's so the thing, too, is that you might now be watching this and go, why would I ever play a game like that? That sounds miserable. But the thing is, it was so cool to be in another world and connected online. And also, and I used to say this all the time when World of Warcraft first came out, and now it's just a common thing, like it's just expected. It was so shocking to people to see a character walking around in World of Warcraft and suddenly know there was a human behind that character, which every video game does that these days. Like every video game, you see someone else running around with an avatar, things like that. But like Dark Age of Camelot was one of those games where it was one of the first games where one of the NPCs walking around was a person who was controlling that. And when I first showed World of Warcraft to my friends, I had to explain like, no, everyone else you see in this town is someone else on their computer also playing this game. And that was a mind-blowing thing. And again, today you have mobile games and it's like, oh yeah, there's people walking around this hub and they're also walking around. But like that was such a mind-blowing thing at the time to have other people control it. So
yeah, I still think to this day Dark Age had the best PvP, player versus player combat system of any similar genre game that I've ever played, because of the dynamic of the three realms. So you have, the ancient England being Albion, the ancient Scandinavia being Midgard, and the ancient Irish fairyland being Hibernia. And you could have, all these dynamics of two teaming up on one. And
yeah, they called it realm versus realm and world versus world. You had players in three different factions, and you could kind of fight over a battleground. And it's just like, I forget the shooter that did it. There's a big shooter that Sony did that was very popular that did the same type of thing where you were constantly fighting over a perpetual battleground. But yeah, it was very popular, and World of Warcraft has brought in some of that type of gameplay to its gameplay. I mean, that's the other thing. The beautiful thing about games too is that currently, we'll see if this changes in the future. Currently, you can copyright images, you can copyright music, you can copyright characters, you can copyright text. You cannot copyright an idea. Mm-hmm. You can't copyright an idea for a game. I cannot make Tetris with the Tetris blocks. I cannot do that. That's illegal for me to recreate that and sell it as Tetris because I don't own Tetris. Mm-hmm. But a game with falling blocks, that I can do. I can make that as much as I want to. As long as I use different shapes, as long as I...
You can make them into pills like Dr. Mario.
I cannot recreate Mario. Of course, Nintendo owns Mario, and they're very jealous about that. They shut down everything they possibly can that comes off of that. But I can make a game about an Italian plumber jumping around if I really want to. Mm-hmm. I can't have him say "Let's go" and all that stuff. But I that's one thing that I think is great about games. And someday that may change. I think it would be a negative thing for games if you could start locking those ideas down or keeping those out. But one thing that's kind of beautiful about the gaming industry right now is that even if you have a great idea and you make a great game out of it, someone can take that idea and make a similar game, and that creates competition, which makes it more interesting, I think.
Can I be a hypothetical client for your game optimization for a moment?
Sure. I will just say I'm one person at a fairly large company, and I cannot speak for the company
Of
or
course.
what other researchers would do necessarily. So
Disclaimers have been disclaimed.
please don't please don't think what I would do is necessarily what the company
Of course,
would do
not
all the time, or
representative.
what everyone would do. Go ahead.
So there's been a lot, speaking of, again, MMORPGs and ones that I play, there's been a lot of kerfuffle over Amazon's New World for various reasons. But one...
This is another MMO that they're trying to make.
It's an MMO that has been
Well,
around for
making-
almost
it's
two.
making.
It's
Yeah,
almost
it's
2
going.
years.
Yep.
The population's fallen off, but the mechanic that frustrates a lot of gamers is you can play the whole game, but then like the pinnacle of PvP in New World is taking over one of the cities in the game. But the mechanic to do so is you have to have like a scheduled war with 50 troops, and everyone has to show up at the designated time. And whoever wins that war and takes control of the town immediately has access to millions and millions and millions of gold because they collect taxes from all the other players who are using the town to craft things and to trade. And so what happens is these very few elite PvP companies become wildly wealthy and can afford all the best items in the game. They can sell gold, they can do whatever they want, and everyone else is kind of begging for scraps in the economy, as it were. How would you deal with a situation like that?
Well, let me think. How do I solve inequality in an economy? I'm just kidding. Inequality is not a solved problem, unfortunately. We still have major issues with it, not just in games and all over the place. So, yeah, it's a good question. There's things you can do to make it easier or harder to balance games. Like you can definitely look at balance and look at how that stuff works. I think that inequality in terms of one side earning more or rewards being too big is just a common issue across games. I don't know about that specific mechanic. I will say, let me back up and give a example that might not connect, but we'll see if it connects. I don't know if it works out or not. I will say, I often say that video games started out as war simulations, basically. They started out with Pong and Space War and Asteroids. Those were the first initial video games that really took off, and they were created essentially in labs. Like people were just making them to have fun, making them to bounce around. And the reason that they started with Pong, which is tennis, you're just bouncing a ball back and forth. The reason they started with like Tank War and with asteroids, like you're projecting asteroids and shooting asteroids around. The reason they started with guns and with bouncing balls and things like that is because that's what computers can calculate. That's what they're really good at calculating.
They're good at ballistics.
Yeah, they're good at ballistics. They're good at tracking things. They're like, does this thing interact with this thing? Does this thing touch this thing or not? Like that's what computers are good at. And so many of our early games were really just like avoid this thing or don't touch this thing. Like many of our early games got into, you know, that's why they were the way. Even Pac-Man, as innovative as it was, because it was about a creature, an actual being that we could connect to and identify with, as opposed to just a tank or a spaceship or something like that. The reason that was really effective, but it's still just about moving and avoiding ghosts. Like it's still just about moving around, touching pills, not touching ghosts. So and that's what computers are good at. They're good at tracking things in space and doing that stuff. That said, we now are at the point where we've used that technology to draw graphics. To draw 3D graphics. We've used that technology to create different mechanics, create different types of shots, arcing shots. Like we've developed in all different ways. And what we're getting to now, and especially as the game audience grows, which the pandemic did grow the game audience significantly, because so many people wanted something to do, and games is an easy thing to pick up and do. We're now getting to the point where, okay, well, some people aren't interested in bullets, and some people aren't interested in things bouncing around. Like, what are they interested in? They're interested in people. They're interested in interactions. They're interested in interacting with other people and interacting and understanding interactions with other people. Sometimes fake people, Mass Effect, and things like that, relationships. Sometimes other people and actual economic interactions and war interactions. And that's fascinating to me. Like, I don't have a good solution for how to keep a capturable city from causing inequality. And the developers probably don't either. That's why it's still happening. They're still trying to figure it out. They have hired economists, like I said. They're still working on it, but yeah, I love that, because now we're getting to, you know, most of the technical problems, and this is the kind of thing that someone says and then they're immediately wrong because a huge set of technical problems shows up. But most of the technical problems in gaming are essentially solved technical problems. We know how to make good graphics. We know how to bounce things back and forth. And that's what people have even said. Like, we just had the Xbox Series X come out a year or so ago. We had the PlayStation 5 come out a year ago. And people are like, I want the graphics to be even better. It's like, well, we can't. Once you're essentially modeling the world realistically, the graphics don't get much better than that. But what I'm excited is to use that processing speed, to use that power to calculate this. So to answer your question, we could change the value of what's in that armory. If it's not a time where people are supposed to attack, if you do beat the armory, you only get a certain percentage of amount. So maybe they want to build up big groups of people to fight. They don't want just two people fighting. They want to build up big groups of people to fight. So how do you get people to wait for other people to show up or do things like that? EVE Online is another big MMO, and they've gone through so many different economic things.
Yeah, talk about real money and real world value. These EVE Online properties are worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Sure, and they're always trying to tweak the game to like make the If someone in the game has 40 million ISK, what the currency is, and you only have 5, like, is there any chance you could beat them in a fight? Is there any chance you could even fight them? Like, they're trying to figure that out. So, so no, there's definitely unsolved problems here for sure. But again, it's not so much, the initial problems were how do we represent the world? How do we represent characters? How do we show realistic graphics? That's pretty much set. Like, we can make pretty darn realistic graphics, and we can make the world look essentially real. Then the question, and AI will help with that. I mean, we'll talk about AI, I'm sure, but then the question is, okay, well, how do we solve societal problems? How do we solve inequality? How do we solve how people interact? And League of Legends, one of the things that Riot Games, who makes League of Legends, has had to deal with, and they've done pretty successfully, is how do we keep people being nice to each other? Because it's a bad experience if you log into a League of Legends game and someone yells at you or curses at you because you don't understand the game and you did something wrong. And Riot Games has really worked hard to try to make it a fun experience. Even if you do bad or even if you don't understand things, they try to keep people happy and keep people doing things like that. They do things like peer effects. Like you can rate people after the game, whether they did well or not, or you can compliment people on whether they did well or compliment people on whether they're learning or things like that. And that gets into social psychology. And that's not even a computer problem. That's just a perception problem. Like, how does the game make you feel good about what you did, even if you did bad? Like, how do they present that?
This reminds me of a conversation that we had in one of the early episodes. I read an excerpt of a 4chan post, which was complaining about AI.
I hear that. Go ahead.
I mean, 4chan posts complain about everything, but they were complaining specifically about something that Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI and ChatGPT, said that the new version of ChatGPT 4 was capable of doing, which was that, it was resistant to all these hacking techniques that people are trying to make it do evil stuff. Sure. But more than that, it would sit there and try to persuade you that your attempt to grief people or whatever negative end you were trying to meet, that it was wrong. And so the person on 4chan was imagining like a future based on that protocol where every time you try to spread hate or troll people or do whatever online, you'll be met with this infinite swarm of very polite, very well-argued AI chatbots with like infinite arguments as to why you shouldn't do it. And you'll just be drowned out of your intention for all time. And it sounds good, but it also sounds incredibly dystopian at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem effective to me to just constantly swarm people. That's just overwhelming. But I don't know. Who knows? I mean, definitely what they have found in games is that if you do share communication, like if you finish a League of Legends game and someone gives you a thumbs up, that's a very positive experience. You're like, even if you did bad, even if you did good, you're like, I had a good experience here. I mean, there are ethical questions there too. What if they say, hey, someone thumbs up your performance? What if no one did? What if they're just trying to make you feel good? Like, what if they're just trying to say, hey, the whole team enjoyed what you did? What if they didn't? Like, it's hard to quantify that or connect it. But again, it's all about perception. It's all about that stuff. Yeah, sure. If 500 people start yelling at you or start saying, hey, why are you so mean? What's going on? Like, that would prevent some behavior for sure. But that's the other thing about hacking too, and that's technology in general, is like it's always an arms race. So it's like, all right, well, how do I mute those 500 people? And then, all right, well, how do we get a guy that talks to you about how not to mute 500 people? Like,
right.
At which point do we actually solve the problem of this guy's a jerk and he needs to understand it, or they need to figure it out?
I want to talk about the human element in MMORPGs that you were referencing a little bit, which is, you said that people are seeking out social interactions and that's one of their main motivators. Something that we have talked about a bunch on this show before is that there are a couple different, talking about social phenomenon, there are a couple different epidemics, quote unquote, that are going around. One is kind of an epidemic of loneliness, of especially young men who, for whatever reason, have withdrawn from like the job market, have withdrawn from regular society, and they find refuge and solace and community in MMORPGs. And I had commented, like, I play these games, I interact with these dudes all the time. Many of them are like high functioning, very intelligent, but for whatever reason, they have totally withdrawn from what we would call normal society.
Sure.
And MMORPGs are their only vehicle for interacting with people, for socializing. And, to some extent, it's like a substitute for feeling productive in your day because you felt like you accomplished something in the game, you leveled up, you got a new piece of armor or whatever, and somehow psychologically that replaces the need to go get food or like go, advance yourself in your career or something like that.
Yeah, we don't have to speak in the super abstract. I mean, the U.S. Surgeon General just came out and said he has suffered from loneliness, and he admitted that's a huge issue. I'll tell you, I've suffered from loneliness. I mean, I definitely have appreciated having games when I don't have a lot of people to hang out with. I wouldn't say it's a substitute necessarily, but it's definitely something that I've benefited from, having things to do, having things to focus on, even when there's you're dealing with loneliness or depression or anything like that. So it's not someone in a basement that we're imaginatively talking about. Like it is something that everyone has to deal with. It's interesting. I don't know. There are definitely AIs that have created relationships already. I'm sure you've heard I forget the name of the service, but there was a service that was running an AI that was supposed to be just a chat bot. People were using it more romantically and got connected more romantically.
Yeah, and they just shut that down.
Yeah, they shut it down because and is that healthy? I don't know. I mean, I do think that it's probably a fair thing to say it's not a substitute. I do think that real human intimacy and real human connection is probably going to always be more beneficial and more effective than a substitute connection, whether it's someone on BetterHelp or an AI or whatever it happens to be. But that said, it is an epidemic and it is a growing issue, and it will continue to be a growing issue, especially as things get problematic. And so, yeah, can those types of interactions be helpful? Probably. Can having an AI tell you that you are good enough and you do deserve love, can that be effective? Sure. Like I don't see why not. So I do think we need to keep it in scope and understand that I do think that whatever sort of solution that does show up with like that should, and I'm not a therapist, obviously. I have no, I don't mean to.
Disclaimers disclaimed.
Well, I don't mean to speak from a point of expertise, but I do think that, yeah, if having a fake conversation or just having an AI explain how people normally act, because sometimes that's it too. Like you get into those holes and you think, this is me and this is what I'll always be and this is my world, and that's not true. That's an irrational thought, and sometimes if an AI can break that irrational thought or knock down that irrational thought, I think it can be effective. So I think there's definitely a solution there. But again, I think most therapists probably would say this, that yes, it may be a stopgap or it may be something that can be helpful. But I think most of the focus should not be on, we'll give you this AI to talk to and now that problem is solved. Mm-hmm. We'll give you this AI to talk to model behaviors that you can eventually take to a more social, realistically social setting. That's what I would imagine. Yeah.
This is one of the reasons that I like things like real world auction houses so much, is because if you do have this, for whatever reason, we don't know why, but if you do have this separation between analog society and immersive worlds like MMORPGs, attaching real world value to things that you do in the game might make it feel like, well, I'm doing something different, something untraditional, non-traditional, but at least it's productive. Like I can sell this thing that I mined in the game for a few $100, and it probably isn't a living to any real sense, but maybe it adds a little bit more to the validity of spending your time that way.
I will question your assumption a little bit that something making money makes it more valid or more productive. I'm not sure that that's exactly true.
Well, it's a component. It's certainly not the only component,
Sure.
But like in terms of like, do I like my job? Am I compensated? Is part of the equation.
Yeah,
it's probably not the most important thing.
Yeah, people do sometimes mark productivity by how much money they make. But again, I would question that assumption just a little bit. I think productivity can be more than just making money in some situations, in some scenarios. But we'll see. I don't know. I mean, when I have generally talk to players. Like I said, the main thing when people, and just very generally, when people say, hey, we're thinking about putting a marketplace in this game, or we're thinking about including real money in this game, what do you think about that? Generally, it's like, keep an eye on the value. Because like I said, the big takeaway for me, and again, not necessarily a takeaway, but I perceived it before it even happened. Not to brag, but the big takeaway is it does affect the value, and it does change how people perceive it. And again, on an individual level, some people will say, oh, if I'm making money, this is my job, and they'll treat it completely differently. Some people say, nope, it's beer money. I'm just picking up a little beer money. It sounds like that you're more in the vein of, oh, if I can get this sword and sell it for a couple bucks, I get it. But I don't know, did you quit your job to start selling stuff in Diablo 3?
No, I never did that.
Yeah, so
and in point of fact, I'm glad that I sold the thing when it did, because the values crashed dramatically not long after I sold that thing.
That is how I knew that you did it early, because yes, the values crashed, and also I believe Blizzard brought the values down because they were surprised. From my perspective, this might not be. I don't know for sure, but I believe they were surprised because when they did that presentation to us, they did say we're expecting $5-10 to be the max, and I think almost all the journalists in that room said, I don't think that's true, and it wasn't true. So, but yeah, does it change people's perception of value? Of course. Some people do go, oh, this is my job now. This is what I'm going to do for a job. I don't think that's necessarily always effective. I mean, Roblox is a company that has made a ton of money on the stock market, did a big IPO and done all that stuff. Roblox, you can create your own games in Roblox. It's basically a platform that you can play games in. It's very popular with children, especially. And there are some kids who just make games in Roblox.
Yeah, or even skins or like items for other people's games that there's a whole marketplace for.
Which they can, and they can sell those things. I think they do have age restrictions. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but there are opportunities to make content and sell content in Roblox, all the way up to there are now some substantial companies that only make content, only make games for Roblox, and have made a lot of money. And Roblox is thrilled to do that because whenever they make a buck in Roblox, Roblox says, oh, we'll take a little piece of that too. So Roblox, just like Apple's App Store, takes a big cut of the money. So they're incentivized to give people opportunities to make and sell items in Roblox. Some developers have made plenty of money. Many developers have tried and not made very much money, and Roblox is still taking their money. So even when developers fail in Roblox still says, "Oh, we'll take a little bit of that cash back." So,
do you have any opinion on this? Like, obviously, there's a lot of talk about all of the different categories of jobs that will be made obsolete by AI, which started out in the olden days with like car manufacturing and robots taking them away, and now we're into more of the white collar workers, the knowledge workers, who AI is going, "Oh, well, yes, of course, I can pass the bar exam, I can pass a medical licensing exam." Like, do you think that humanity will be pushed more to the this kind of ephemera of like, well, I make skins for a kitty cat game in Roblox as a side hustle because I've been pushed to do that?
Well, I a few years ago, I specifically, I was interviewing someone at the job, and they asked me, what is the most exciting thing in gaming? And this is about 2021, I said this to them. I said, AI is the most exciting thing for me in gaming. And the reason I said it at the time was because right now, the majority of the budget in most video games is your art and design budget. And when I say art and design, it's not necessarily even game design. It's like level design. It's object design. Almost every game has to remake a barrel. Now, there is Unreal Engine is a very popular game engine, and they do sell their own assets, and we're starting to see some assets start to be reused where we make one barrel and you can use it in a couple of different games, even though it looks the same, but things like that. But yes, the vast majority of huge game budgets is all these people who have to sit down and very creatively, very craftily make items in games. With AI, you can very easily kick out levels, and you can very easily tweak levels, and No Man's Sky is a very popular game that is entirely what they call procedurally designed. Nothing in almost nothing. I think they have some things now, but almost nothing in No Man's Sky was designed by a human being. It was designed by a script that said, instead of, usually someone sits down with a 3D modeler and they go, let me design this animal. This animal's going to have a tail on it. It's going to have some legs on it. And they draw it all out with their 3D modeler. In No Man's Sky, the script tells what the animal looks like. And so there are many animals in the game that the developers have never seen before because they just wrote the script to create that. And with AI, that's much easier because AI can also write the script. It can be like, write me a script that creates animals for No Man's Sky, or write me a script that does this.
Right.
So what I think we're heading to in terms of gaming, and this is the idea that I've had for a little while, and we'll talk about obsolescence and jobs in just a second, but the beautiful idea that's coming out of this, and this is what I kind of want someday, is a Skyrim type game where Skyrim is a game where you're kind of just wandering around an open world. You can do whatever you want. You can live wherever you want. You can get married if you want to. You can go over here. You can go down this cave, this dungeon. You can do whatever you want.
RPG, but not an MMORPG.
That was still designed by hand. That was designed by some very talented people up in Maryland, Bethesda, who made that game. In the future, very soon, probably, we will have a game that is like Skyrim, but designed itself as you play it. And you'll be walking through a field and you'll see a flower. And you'll be like, oh, cool, there's a flower over here. And you'll pick the flower and the game will go. And with AI, we often make things anthropological. I'm doing it right now saying the game will think of this. The game doesn't think of it. It's all designed by a script. But the game will then say, oh, they picked a flower. It will create 12 more flowers and put them all around the world for you to find. And then you'll see a creature and you'll run away. And the game will go, ooh, they don't like creatures. No more creatures. So we're going to lower the amount of creatures in this game. Or you'll see a creature and run right for it and start stabbing it. And be like, ooh, they want something to stab, and they'll put more things to stab in the game. So you'll have a game that will dynamically create itself as you play it based on the things that you do in the game. Whatever you like to do in the game, it will give more content or create more content for those types of activities.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of a procedurally generated universe with 6 trillion worlds was insane, 6-7 years ago.
And No Man's Sky did it.
Yeah, and then No Man's Sky did it.
Yeah, and it is crazy. And you also get to a point where you can imagine something like you go home one day and you say, I want to play a roguelike set in Rome where I'm fighting, the fates. And the game will just create, the AI will just script that game out for you to play that night. And maybe you can save that prompt just like in normal ChatGPT and do things like that. So I do see that future coming. And I do think that's where we're eventually headed, is the game that basically builds itself according to how you choose to play it or what you're most interested in, which is really exciting to me because, the next time I play that game, maybe I won't pick that flower and see what happens. Like, there's definitely lots of experimentation.
It sounds amazing. It also sounds immersive to the point of more addicting and engaging than any game that was created not specifically for you as a human.
It's true. I mean, you definitely can create more specific stuff. And then it all comes down to artistry as well. No Man's Sky, we're saying that this stuff is all created by scripts. Obviously, the developers behind that game are brilliant. And the math that goes into the creations that they've made, and not just the math, but the understanding of biology, the understanding of planet ecology, the understanding of how the solar system works and how the solar system is laid out, the amount of work they did on that game is phenomenal. And so even if we have AI creating games or AI creating games on the fly, it's not like you press a button and it's done. There's still a ton of math and a ton of design work going into it. And part of my job will be, how do you then make this new content feel like it fits in this world? Like, what qualities does this content need to fit into the world? That's all decisions that humans would probably have to make.
And also, it's easy to forget that No Man's Sky was a massive failure at launch because it was so wonky and things were broken and it was easy to find something that didn't make sense, and it took them years to come around to this, what is considered to be this masterpiece.
And
now.
And they had, and Hello Games, who I've interviewed, the Sean Murray, the lead of Hello Games, a couple times. I mean, they have learned so much in the last few years since they've made that game about how procedural generation works and how to make an environment feel interesting and feel cool. And that goes back to what we started talking about, which is when you get to an alien planet, what do you expect that alien planet to be like? Do you expect it to be flat and boring? That's kind of what it was the first day it came out. And I don't mean to attack their game. It was never boring, but now they have tweaked the generation so that there are giant caves, or there's a big not statue, but big formation somewhere, or it's a little bit more, or this one's a forest planet, or this one's an ice planet. Like, they've tweaked and added things to that too. And that will happen with AI generated games as well. Now you can get to job stuff. Well, okay, if we have an AI developing this game, do we need these artists?
Yeah, what happens to the game development company?
And that is something where, yes, I do think that some people who are half into art or not super into art, when an AI can make a chair that looks as good as you can make it, if you're making chairs in games, I would start reading a little bit. I would start looking for other things to do. But that said, we will always need people who are like, ooh, but if this chair had this, it would be cooler. Or if we had this option, it would be cooler. And the AI, the other thing is that, I don't know how much you guys have talked about this, but the AI that we have right now, the language learning models like ChatGPT that everyone's familiar with, those are still bounded by the knowledge that they have. Of course, the AI can't make any. It can That's not true. The AI can make things that don't exist, but it is only making reflections of the things that it knows exist, if that makes sense. So it's
not a truly creative force. It more is a way of amalgamating the things that it's come across.
It can combine things in new ways, and it can make things that look like the things that it knows. Like it can, again, we're anthropomorphizing it. It's not, it doesn't think like that. It's so easy to fall into that trip of talking about it like a thing that exists, but yeah, so we're still at the stage where AI is reflecting what it has already seen, what it has already created, and the truly creative people in games, just like the truly creative writers in the world, like they are still able to combine things and able to create things that AI just has not been able to dream of yet. Very quickly, that may change. I don't know.
So you still think that there is a viability as a graphic artist within the gaming industry? Because for instance, there's a viral post that was going around last month where somebody was saying, I work for a video game company, I'm a graphic artist, and kind of almost overnight, my job has changed from doing these renderings and concept art and that kind of stuff to just putting in prompts into Midjourney. Yeah. And they go, I don't feel like I'm an artist anymore. Now I'm just doing prompts and I want to quit and I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, that's what I think will probably happen, is that people who are half into it or people who get a specific thing out of that experience might not get that thing in that experience anymore. Now, does that mean that, a game company will just start laying off artists? Probably not. There probably will be some artistic sensibility needed, or maybe a game will fail and then people will be like, oh no, we have to make a game like this, and they'll switch. So maybe just in the course of natural business, you'll lose some jobs like that. I don't necessarily believe that there's going to be a day that they're like, oh, time to go home, everybody. I don't think that's going to go that way, but who knows? I mean, that's the other thing I've discovered in this job, is that anyone who tells you they can accurately predict the future is wrong. I've predicted the future a lot, but every prediction, and this is what gets into language learning models, every prediction comes with a level of confidence. There's always confidence in terms of what people are doing, and so when we understand that, and that's what these models are essentially doing, is kind of predicting based on what they've seen before. So yeah, we wandered around a bunch, but yes, I do think that AI is fascinating. I think it will undoubtedly change how game content is generated. I think it will undoubtedly change how people create items in games and create content in games. I do think we're headed to a future where, like I said, you will put in a prompt and you'll get a game out of it. Already, I have gone to ChatGPT and said, write me a script to do this, and it easily writes Python and easily writes other stuff. I did once try write me a game that does this, and it didn't quite get me there.
It seems like if you're already a coder, it's easier to get out the code components that you want from ChatGPT because you can ask the right kind of questions.
Well, and that's the wildest thing about AI is, and I think I forget his name, unfortunately. Someone like Tim Berners-Lee, Stephen Wolfram, who is running. He's doing amazing stuff with ChatGPT. They're doing all kinds of plugins that are incredible. He's really insightful, and he's been working with the ChatGPT team for a long time, so he's really knowledgeable about AI and about all this stuff. And he was basically I completely lost my train of thought. But Stephen Wolfram had some really interesting things to say about AI in terms of like what it should be or where it should head. So.
Well, speaking of levels of confidence, I'm confident that I enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you being here, Mike.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I feel like I need to put a capper on my AI predictions there. But yeah,
you can add some more disclaimers if you like.
Well, I do think that AI. I thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk about this stuff. I'm super excited about AI. I do think it will create some unforeseen consequences that we all have to deal with, but it's a tool just like the tools that we have. And you can do bad things with the tools that we have right now. You can do good things with the tools we have right now. I think in the future, you'll be able to do really good things with AI. You'll be able to do really bad things with AI, and we'll probably see all of that stuff happen as it goes. So I'm super fascinated to see what happens with it.
Cool. This has been AI Affected with Mike Schramm. Thanks for joining us. And now, this is the part of the show where if it were like a talk show, like an evening talk show, they would fade out the volume and you would watch the people like have their private conversation. Except that we don't. We just talk.
That was great.
We just talk until George is like, okay, now it's done.
Sure. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, you want to talk on that for a second? So, it's like the stereotype of just the acronym NPC is it's a little bit dumb. It only has a few different ways to interact with you, and you can ignore it unless you need something from it. So, what happens when an NPC is controlled by an interactive AI?
Yeah, I mean, already there's AI Dungeon, which is a amazing text adventure game. It's basically a text adventure game powered by an AI.
It's a MUD.
And this is similar to what we've talked about in terms of Skyrim that allows you to do anything, in that you can go through this text adventure and it is creating the text adventure as you play it. The first version I played was kind of rough. It didn't really connect the dots, but they learned over time what people are looking for from this tool. And the latest version of AI, which I believe is powered by ChatGPT, is fascinating because it will connect all the things you've done. So if you're like, go into the castle and you find a princess there, then later in the game, it'll remind you of the princess, or it'll remind you of stuff that came before, which is super interesting. So yes, text generation will probably be replaced very quickly by AI. It doesn't mean that writers will be replaced, because you still want to write interesting characters. But if you tell AI, pretend you are a elf who does this,
the writer just became a prompt engineer.
Yeah, and that's true, and that's what we're seeing is different things moving to prompt. That's what I was going to say about Stephen Wolfram, is that he was saying that the biggest threat for AI right now is probably coding. Coding is a very arcane art right now. You have to learn a lot about how to get your syntax right and how to line things up correctly. And these language models are essentially turning all computer interaction into language-based interaction. And so in the future, you might not need to know Python how to code, or know how JavaScript works, or know all these intricate libraries or different things like that. And just like in terms of writing an NPC, you might not need to know how to write interesting dialogue necessarily. But that said, writers will always look at ChatGPT's dialogue and go, this could be better, this could be better. So there's definitely improvements to be made there. But yeah, I'm fascinated. Definitely, yes, the old school method of this NPC has said everything there is to say to me in this game might go away, because there might be NPCs that are like, what else do you want to know about?
That is an insane, as somebody else who really enjoys this kind of MMORPG environment, that you could go up to like a wench in front of a castle and like start interrogating her about like everything that's going on in the village, and she'll have a reasonable answer that makes sense.
I do think that the wench will have a lot of interesting things to say, because I'm sure they do. But do you want to talk to a farmer in a field for 4 hours?
I might. I go down weird rabbit holes in games like this.
I mean, that is the thing too, because games are such a such a accessible medium for anyone in any culture. I do think that the ultimate future of games, which I'm super excited about, is using games to teach core knowledge. If you're going to Mars and you're going to live there for 3 years, there's a lot you got to know in terms of how to interact with stuff, what's dangerous, what's not dangerous. And the best way to teach it is probably going to be an interactive experience, a game type like experience. So,
are you familiar with, what's her name? Is it like Jane McGonigal?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, she's great.
She's, I guess, a game developer and an analyst also, but her focus was entirely on how do we harness the billions of hours of human brain power that have been invested in World of Warcraft, for instance, and use that to synthesize, DNA strands, or like use it to figure out, various scientific problems and things like that.
Yeah. And then gamification is a growing area for sure. Although it's been tweaked a little bit, it's turned into like, do your job for bonus tokens or stuff like that. That's not as
that sounds dystopian.
It's not quite as interesting, I think, in some ways. But yes, I do think that this idea of, learning is interaction. Games are interaction, and I do think that there is a relationship between learning and games. And think of all the things you know about Mario. Think of all the things you know about Sonic the Hedgehog. You learned a lot about over the years playing games, and I do think that yes, in the future we will have scenarios where we need to teach people something specifically very quickly, and we need it to be very effective. And I truly believe that in those situations we will probably end up turning to games. So that's really exciting for me personally.
That is exciting.
That's a better ending. You can cut that in the...
Cool. It is what it is. We'll cut highlights out. So
that's better than me going, I forgot what I was talking about. Well, I hope it was interesting.
Yeah, that's great.
I sound dumb sometimes, but...
That's great.